This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
I'm not afraid because I really witnessed all the things my parents went through. By comparison, I have it easy. And so I just have so much gratitude, and I see all the sacrifices they made for me. And I just understand the choices they made to just ensure that I had a better life, me and all my siblings.
Welcome to Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan. I'm Dr. Dan. This show is about making the world a more loving, accepting, and compassionate place, one parent, one person, and one child at a time. The key to raising healthy and engaged kids is for us parents to seek the same in our own lives while striving to be the best versions of ourselves each day. No matter who you are or where you came from, with increased awareness, you can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint for your children, your family, and all those you care about while living your own life to the fullest. Today's show is Well-Read Black Girl, uplifting the narratives of Black women, parenting, and more with Glory Edim. Glory is the founder of Well-Read Black Girl, a book club and online community that celebrates the uniqueness of Black literature and sisterhood. In fall 2017, she organized the first ever Well-Read Black Girl Literary Festival. Glory has worked as a creative strategist for over 10 years at startups and cultural institutions, including Kickstarter, the Webby Awards, and the New York Foundation for the Arts. She received the 2017 Innovators Award from the Los Angeles Times Book Prizes for her work as a literary advocate. Her first anthology, Well-Read Black Girl, Finding Our Stories, Discovering Ourselves, was published by Random House in 2018. And continuing her life's work to brighten and enrich American reading lives through the work of legendary Black authors, she recently launched her Well-Read Black Girl Library series with On Girlhood, published by Live Right in October of 2021. Glory serves on the board of New York City's Housing Works Bookstore and lives in Washington, D.C. Glory, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me. That was such a beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it.
So, wow. You from 2015 Instagram to 2017 to 2018 to a festival to a podcast. I didn't even throw the podcast in there. We got to talk all about this stuff. So, could you have even imagined what was to come?
No way. There is no way I could have predicted all of these incredible things. I'm always on this, in the space of awe and feeling so much gratitude because it's this is my job. I get to read books and host book clubs and have festivals and have a podcast. It feels so phenomenal, and all my little girl dreams come true.
Yeah.
So I'm always so excited to be yes, this is my job, and I show up for it every day with just more excitement and more enthusiasm because I'm wow, I get to read books for a living. How much better could it be?
That is so cool. You're making me think. When I was in college, I remember during some of the academic struggles or what am I going to be when I grow up? I remember just having this thought of, gosh, there's got to be a job where I just get paid to show up and be myself.
Yes.
And I think you found it.
Yeah, I did completely on accident. This was not, I majored in journalism. I was always very much into like, living in the archive and, being in the stacks of my library and just, I just loved information and I loved hearing people's stories. And so that's why I think I gravitated to journalism,
Mm-hmm.
first off. But as I got into this world of publishing, it just became this whole new purpose of really finding ways to amplify the works of Black writers and
Mm-hmm.
being able to celebrate their achievements in the literary world. It just feels like such a blessing.
You write and talk about how, I mean, this goes way back, because as you recount your upbringing and tell your story, you talk about how Black writers were helped to raise you, right? These
Yes. And
powerful women helped to raise you.
I feel like in so many ways we think about the role models that we have in our lives and the mentors, and books were my mentor. Like I really would look at covers and read passages and feel like they were giving me life instructions. And whether I was 7 years old or 17, I really found a lot of belonging and instruction when I read different books. So when I was reading like Little Women, I was like, okay, yeah, Joe March is doing this. I can do it too. Like I had that
Mm-hmm.
kind of like gusto and really, now that I think about it, I just was like, I really felt like if I read something and another person did it, whether it was like a real person or a character, I was like, okay, this means I can do it too. So it gave me a lot of self confidence and it made me see like there was a path, even if I couldn't make it up on my own. If I read it in a textbook, if I read it in one of my like favorite novels, it made it feel possible.
And did it make it feel more possible or only possible if it was a character of color? Did it
Well,
generalize? Because I know, I mean, you're amplifying Black voices
yes.
for Black girls.
Yes, 100%. For me, the first time I really saw a Black girl protagonist was Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. And I think for so many young Black girls, that really sets the precedent. The book is beautifully written, but it's a very hard and traumatic book. And it wasn't as if I like could relate to her experience for per se, but I related to this idea of feeling underappreciated or overlooked or not having the support necessarily that I needed. So I when I read her, I was like, wow, like you can have a singular story and it doesn't matter if it's sad or if it doesn't matter if it's like joyous. It's like it's your story and you can own it. And it took away any kind of reservation or shame I had about the hard parts of my life. It made me feel like I can tell all parts of my story and it's going to be embraced and accepted. And so I started to really think about self acceptance, like from that one book and reading Toni
Mm-hmm.
Morrison. And then when I read, Maya Angelou's, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. That was another like really foundational book for me because I was in love with her voice. Like I'm very much a voice editor and a voice reader. I live for dialogue and hearing people, using their own dialects and just embodying their full selves.
Mm-hmm.
And reading Maya Angelou, it didn't have like this it didn't feel too conservative. It felt like very lively and like you were having a conversation with another person, but you were doing it through the text, like you were reading it chapter after chapter. But I would also look at her picture and think like she looks like my mom or one of my aunts or like
Mm-hmm.
like someone who's in like a member of my church. And that also made me feel like, okay, like here's another example of a woman telling her own story. And at that time, with the exception of the narrative of Frederick Douglass, I hadn't read any kind of autobiography or like memoir by another Black woman. So she
Mm-hmm.
was like the first person where I encountered in that way, where I was like, wow, like she's telling this beautiful story and it's a bestseller. And not only is it one story, it's like multiple stories where she's like living in Ghana and then she goes, then she's like part of the civil rights movement and she's raising her son and then she's a dancer. Like she was doing all these incredible things and also experiencing really challenging things as well. You can feel Maya Angelou's encounters with racism and being part of or even the patriarchy, like sexism, like all of these
Mm-hmm.
things she's
Mm-hmm.
encountering, but she's doing it all in her own voice. And so that was what encouraged me. I was like, I can develop my own voice. I can be my own person, all the hard things, all the good things, and I can just fully exist. And with every story I read and like put as part of my library, it just became my sanctuary and my own little armor of like, okay, I read it, I can do it. I read this, I can do this. So I just
Nice.
kind of like found myself in stories that way. And it was very just motivating to have to see myself reflected in the stories.
And so you get this T-shirt, right?
Yes.
You get this T-shirt from your boyfriend,
Yes.
and we'll tell everyone the story. How this
Oh yeah.
T-shirt has
So
become a movement. Yes.
it definitely, the t-shirt is such a part of my origin story. So my boyfriend at the time, I was a very very dedicated reader. So anywhere we went, I had a book with me. And so I was like the bookworm, the well-read Black girl. And for one of my birthdays, he made me a shirt that said that. And so I would wear it around. It was one of a kind. You couldn't buy it in any other store. And I was living in Brooklyn, New York at the time. And people would come up to me and they would just be so excited, like, where did you get that shirt? Like, what are you reading? It became like a conversation starter. And as you know, like in New York, we're all so close to each other. We're sitting next to each other on the subway, and it just invites conversation. So that happened more than enough times where I was like, there's something here. Like, let's have a, let's take this a step further. And I ended up starting a book club and the newsletter, and then, the festival and everything else started from that one shirt that said, well-read Black girl. That was like such a decoration and a statement of like, this is who I am.
And totally organic how this
Yes.
whole thing has unfolded. Right?
Yeah, 100%. Like there was no business plan attached to this. I had no intentions of like going viral or doing anything. It was in all ways a real book club. And I want to say for the first 2 years of me hosting the book club, like the same 20 women showed up. Like it was like these women are now very close friends, and we go to brunch together, or we go to each other's like baby showers. But we really just sat and talked about the books and the stories, and the key component that made things different was we invited the author to join us. So I would have a brunch and in a little spot, or we would have a pizza party, and we would come and talk to the author about their books. So some of the beginning books was trying to think of a great example. Oh, Britt Bennett. Britt Bennett's first book, The Mothers, came out, and we invited her to speak with us. Who else? Oh, Nicole Dennis Benn. Her first book, Here Comes the Sun, was immensely popular. She came to brunch with us and had a whole conversation and told us about her writing process. It was just so eye-opening. And I feel like every time I invited an author to come join us, like I was still so surprised that when they would say, yes, like, sure, okay, like you have this Instagram. And now we have like, close to like 500,000 followers. At the time, I probably had 50 people just like, lovingly interacting on Instagram. So it grew very organically, but the excitement and the support of, especially with debut writers, when it's like their first book and they're just like so excited to get out there, that's like the best feeling, because their work is so precious and so tender, and you want to give them all the support and love possible.
It's so cool. I was going to say, from this small amount of people till I saw hundreds of thousands, it grew in time, not that long of time. And then you have the authors that you recommended. And then I was, looking and watching your stuff, and there's President Obama. So just President Barack Obama comes and joins the book club. Like,
okay, so I do have to tell, that happened in 2021 when his new book, A Promised Land, came out, and that was like a very special edition. And I promise you, when he joined us, I was just like, please tell Michelle we said hello. We made a great exception for the president, Barack Obama. We adore him. So it's just like, all right, even how we, because the book is so different from our usual shtick is like contemporary novels, and different genres, but we tackled that book in such an efficient way. Like, I honestly felt like I was back in like a history class, because we were like, okay, like let's study, let's like digest it. We had so many questions amongst ourselves before we had the book club with him, because we just wanted to get it right. We wanted to do, make sure he just had the best experience with our book club, and he was amazing. And I got a chance for my son to say hello to him before we got on camera. My son, I had just had my son at the time. He was probably like, oh my gosh, I don't know, maybe like 6 months. And he was completely spazzing out on the camera. Like, I was trying to get him to stay still. I'm like, the president is here, please. Like, say hello. I even put him in a little, I put him in a Frederick Douglass onesie. I don't even know if the president.
Yeah.
I was like trying to really make a moment. And my son was like drooling over his book and not even paying attention. But still, it was beautiful.
That is beautiful. And like, wow, right? Like, wow, that can happen. So I want to take us back now a little bit. And we are close to Mother's Day. We're in the middle of May here. So happy early Mother's Day to you.
Thank you.
And this is the segue to asking about your experience of being parented and your mother. On the show, we're all about having increased awareness, and we were all parented, and we take some of that stuff with us, and we're like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then there's some other stuff we're like, I might want to do that differently. And we're just trying to be aware. So now I'm just curious about your experience of being parented. And of course, now you are a parent yourself.
Yes. So that's such a great question. I absolutely adore my mom, and she's been so helpful in helping me just get comfortable as a new parent, because there were so many things I felt nervous about, or I thought I was like doing wrong. And she's like, no, there's no one way to do something. There's no right or wrong. Like, you just have to really embody it and be the best mother that you can be. And so that's been the biggest lesson that I've been able to take away from her, this idea of having such patience and self-compassion for yourself, and be able to see when you need help, So my mom's constantly reminding me, like, do you need help? Can I help you? How can I like show up for you? And that's really helped me feel more comfortable, because I also had my son at the top of the pandemic. Okay. So there was no kind of blueprint to how to have a baby during a pandemic. I had no idea what even to expect. And I was isolated in a lot of ways. Like, I wasn't able to kind of like call on other friends or go to like mommy and me groups. I was like in the house for like 2 years with like my mom and my son. And like, if I didn't have her, I would have just like lost my mind. Like, she really kind of helped me feel comfortable. And those lessons that I learned from her in childhood about like really, how can I even explain it? Like, I think about like showing up for yourself, but in essence, it's like being resourceful. Like, my mom is very much like, you can figure this out. Like let's try. Let's like ask the questions. Let's look it up. And back in the day, it was like look it up in an encyclopedia.
Oh yeah.
Now it's more or less, looking it up on Google, or like just asking the questions, or getting the people around you to help and support you. And I grew up in a really wonderful community. I have a small family per se. Like, it's just my brothers and I. A majority of my extended family lives overseas. I'm first generation, so most of my family is in Nigeria. So here in the United States, I have like a small blood family, but but in terms of kinship, in terms of people that like I call auntie and uncle and come all together, my mom made this beautiful, robust community. So like, whether it's like our neighbor next door, or like our friends at church, or like, the women in my dance class, or like the uncles that I met that like took us fishing, they weren't necessarily like my mom doesn't, she has one brother, but I could say like maybe like 30 uncles, what I mean? I have so many people that I call like auntie and uncle, because they grew up with me. And my mom was very intentional about like making that community and finding people to like help support us, although we had a lot of our family in another part of the world, And so that is like a main thing that I have taken away from her. Like, okay, like I can build my community. I can find ways to be the best parent possible. And I don't have to be intimidated by the unknown, and that's probably why I gravitated to books so much. Cause it was like, all right, like my mom's like, look it up.
Yeah,
Let's like figure it out together, because there were also aspects of her life that, because she was new to American culture and she was like assimilating, that she didn't know either. So we were both learning together. So that idea of like, we can figure this out together as a parenting tool has been awesome to learn with her, but also to teach my son. Like, he's only 2 right now, but it is so amazing to see like his little brain making connections and asking him why, and him just like trying to figure. Right now he's very much into trains and trucks and wheels, and it's like, how many wheels are they, like how do they go, like how can we count, like that curiosity and that vigor is just so, I feel like, was really ingrained into my childhood, and I can't wait to like do that with my son. Like, I can't wait to just like have him ask me. I asked so many questions as a child. Like, I was just like,
payback's coming.
Oh, it's coming. And ready at like he's already just on like the why, how, like he wants to know. And I'm eager to be like, okay, like we're gonna do this together. The other day I got him this book about because we saw a rainbow for the first time and we were trying to explain the rainbow. So I found this like awesome book that like explained clouds and explained confluences and rivers and like it was like all these things that I'm just like, I haven't thought about any of these things. And like, I don't know, since I don't know, like a small child, but I'm like, I'm ready to teach him and like understand all those things. And I might have gone on a tangent with this, but I think that like it answers your question.
Well, your mom as a resourceful person who brought together your village, because your blood relatives are all far, far away, right? So
exactly.
You make a family, and you bring in that kin, and you learn, right? I also read that your mom read a lot to you growing up, and at night, and part of your bedtime ritual also seems that it had quite an impact on what you have become and what you're doing today.
100%. Like her reading poems and sometimes just reading the Washington Post. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and just like her reading from the newspaper. Or I even remember going to the Smithsonian. We went to the Smithsonian all the time. In retrospect, I understand now it's because the museums here in D.C. are free, and it's like an amazing just like landscape for children to run around and like have so much fun. But we went to the museum all the time, and even going on like the public transportation here, like she would point to a map and she would say like, pick a color, like all the colors here are like orange line, blue line, red line, and we would pick a color and then we would go on that train and it would become an adventure, so sometimes she didn't even have a destination for us. It would just be like, let's explore together, but you get to have like an opportunity to choose it and like make this like part of your agency. Like she gave me choices as a young person, and it made me feel like my opinion mattered and I could share things with my mom and she would value my opinion. So it was a wonderful thing, it was just a wonderful thing to get that kind of like validation as a young person.
Yeah, definitely. And something that I'm already hearing you're doing with your little one as well.
Yes, 100%.
Work-life balance. We hear that a lot. So here you are, like your let's say your work, your career, but I also feel that that's limiting to even call it that. Like your mission, your movement, it continues to grow. And from, not only just what you're putting out there on social media, but your blogging. We're going to talk about your new anthology soon, your podcast. Before we dive into all of those little areas, on the parenting realm, personal realm, how do you manage all that?
Oh, it's again, I'm new. He's only 2, so I'm still in the beginning stages. If you have any tips, please pass them over. I would say that I don't even use the term work-life balance anymore. I just think of it as like how I manage my time. And, some days I have more time than others. And if I don't get to something or a task that needs to be completed or a deadline, I've stopped beating myself up and I've given myself a lot more grace. And that has like freed up my mind. And it's more liberating to say, okay, like I was able to get these 5 things done and the 6th one is going to happen tomorrow. So I kind of just like, I'm okay with pushing things to the next day. I understand how to make things priority. I ask for help a lot more. I have a great assistant, and it's not all about like balance. Some days it's about, I need to sleep for 8 hours, or we're just going to go to the park and like run around and be free. Like I really just try to make the most of my days and not beat myself up if I can't do something. And that's how I get the things done. It's just like, they're really long lists, and I try to just like show up for myself every day and do the best that I can. And that's working for me so far. I mean, I would say before I had my son, I probably was a little bit more type A and a little bit, more rigid with my goals and tasks. Now it's like, okay, I'm going to open it up. There's more flexibility there. And it also gives me more space for reflection. So when I give myself these buffer times of like, okay, like if I'm going to have maybe 2 or 3 hours where I'm really engaging in creative play, or I'm thinking about a beautiful song, or I'm like really reading a book and thinking about the book as an act of pleasure and not for facilitation, because my work is so grounded in analyzing the book and being able to talk to like a large body of people about the book. Sometimes I just need to sit back and read something just for my own edification. And that's really important to me. So I'm like, okay, I'm like really enjoying this poem or really lost in this story, and I'm not thinking about how to regurgitate it or share it on social media. That's also part of me managing my time so I can understand different concepts and be creative.
I like what you're saying. I like this idea of it's not about work-life balance, because that phrase annoys several people because, right? It's like, what is that? What do you mean? How do you even have balance? So I like the idea of managing time, and you're choosing your time, like being mindful about your time. It doesn't have to be balanced. You can actually one day work a lot, another day rest a lot. Yes. And the other thing that you said that's really important for everyone to hear is like being kind to yourself and showing up for yourself, right? Yes. Like if you could do those 2 things, people, most days, I think that's a big win.
Yeah, you're going to be in such a great place. And it gives you, I also, now that I have a little person, I try to talk to myself like how I talk to him. I'm always, we wake up the day and we say, I am smart, I am kind, I am strong, like I'm constantly saying these affirmations to him because I want him to feel that. Nice. I want him to start the day in a really wonderful way. And I'm like, I need to say these affirmations to myself. I'm smart and I'm kind and I'm brilliant and I'm beautiful. Like, and I'm able to do all these things. So I just think that giving yourself that love and that nourishment, just like you give to your children, makes a huge difference. And I think sometimes we can actually underestimate that, like how it is, like how you talk to yourself matters, So I try to really just like be loving to myself and say, okay, you got this, you can do it. Let's try again. Let's read more books. Let's or binge TV or binge Netflix. You know what I mean? Right, it's not always literary, but just like doing things that will make me feel good and like ready to tackle the next day.
Nice.
Experience a progressive lens engineered with AI from Essilor, powered by individual measurements of your visual behavior. A lens personalized to you by an Essilor expert. Discover Verilux XR Track and enjoy instantly sharp vision in motion and seamless transitions from near to far. Find your local Essilor expert today at Essilor.com.
This episode is brought to you by Enterprise Mobility. From fleet management to flexible truck rentals to technology solutions, Enterprise Mobility helps businesses find the right mobility solutions so they can find new opportunities. Because if your business is on the road, they want to make sure it's on the road to success. Enterprise Mobility, moving you moves the world. Find your road at enterprisemobility.com.
Paying rent can feel like throwing money away. And when you're spending so much, it can be hard to see yourself buying a home. So Rocket Mortgage is helping you put your monthly rent towards home ownership with Rent Rewards. For the first time, save up to $5,000 off the cost of your first home just by paying rent. Only at Rocket Mortgage. Call 800-4ROCKET or visit rocket.com to find out more.
Rocket Mortgage, LLC. Licensed in all 50 states. NMLSConsumerAccess.org. Number 3030.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your projects here. So I want to go back to a quote from you about when you were curating your first anthology, Well-Read Black Girl. And you said, I was very clear about that I wanted to hear both sides of the story. I want to know the things that are troubling and have shaped an identity, but also how you're able to overcome that. Because when you go through something, it's not only the thing that defines you, it helps to uplift you out of that. It's the experience and the challenge that pulls you into another space that allows you to be brighter and bolder for sharing your story without reservation.
Oh, wow. I said that. That sounds great.
Yeah, that was inspiring to me. That was powerful.
That's amazing. I mean, but it's so true. I have had an experience, I tell you, the same year that I got my book deal, and I was just like, I felt like I was on the, like, it was the biggest professional accomplishment that I had made to date, that year was also the same year I lost my father. Right. So you can have these incredible moments of joy and just like complete wonder. And then also in the same moment, be dealing with loss and grief and great pain, And like, I feel like that's a real thing that people encounter all the time. Like, both things can be true. Like, I can be so happy that I have this book and I'm having this experience, and I could be mourning my father at the same time. So I also, like, I understand that that's people's dualities and that's their life. Like, we're not only one thing. And the earlier I was able to accept that and embrace that, it just made it made every decision or every life moment seem like, okay, like, there's more. It's the, the and, like, it's like, it's just like more that's always happening. You can't assume that one person has like the perfect life or the best experience, because you just never know. And I try to really have that perspective with everything that I encounter. Like, there's multiple things happening at once. There's just so much emotion. There's just like so much always happening. And I try to just be mindful of that.
Well, and you credit your father to giving you your beautiful name of Glory.
Yes.
And to the other thing when I was reading about you, he had a beautiful name. Tell everyone his beautiful name.
Yes. So my dad came here. He migrated from Nigeria in the 80s. He went to Howard University, which I also attended Howard. Yes. I followed in my father's footsteps. I was very close with my father. And my dad's name is Elegance. And so that was when he came to the States. And most people, he wanted to change his name. He wanted to have something that felt more American, which I'm like, Dad, you could have named yourself John or like Chris or anything. And you decided upon Elegance. Like, how does that even happen? But he had his strong community of friends, and he was very just dapper. He had always had his suits on and had his, his hair in a certain way and his glasses. And he just had such a rich style that it was like a name that stuck with him when he came to the States. So that's my dad's
Elegance.
name. He was very elegant. So just had such a beautiful energy about him. And he was also just an avid reader, more so with historical books and politics. He loved politics. He was very much into just like knowing about world events. So everything that I read and understood about like the civil rights movement or even the Biafra War. Both my parents are, again, in Nigeria. They grew up during the Biafra War in the 70s. And so like it just to be like politically aware and understand my place as a citizen and as a global citizen, and understanding like the Africa diaspora. So just this, I am first generation, but I grew up here in the United States, like what that means for me. Again, more duality, like I am of two places, and how I reconcile that, how I express myself, how I show up when it comes to being an activist. So important. Like my dad was the first person who told me about Marcus Garvey and, Malcolm X and all, Martin Luther King, all these incredible people. But he was looking at it from a perspective as a Nigerian in the United States and what that meant, and how his kids are going to be they're going to be citizens. It's just so amazing when I think back at all the experiences my parents went through and how they were just like so yearning and like going after the American dream. And I just feel that is actually the one thing I will say about being first generation or coming from a working class background. There is like this motivation, and at least for me, I have a great motivation, but I'm also not afraid. Like I'm not afraid to fail. Like I'm really not afraid to fail. Like saying no to me does not deter me. Like I'm just like, maybe someone else would say yes. Like it's like I'm not afraid because I really witnessed all the things my parents went through, and like by comparison, I have it easy. You know what I mean? Like, and so I just have so much gratitude, and I see all the sacrifices they made for me. And I just understand the choices they made to like, just ensure that I had a better life, me and all my siblings. And it's also really amazing to see, despite different circumstances, wherever you are in the world, parents want the best for their kids.
Absolutely.
Like point blank,
right.
Like wherever you are, like it just is like they want you to do a little bit better than they did. And I feel that for my son. I'm just like, we are in a great position. I feel like I'm doing my best to really make sure he has access to all the things. But even then, I want him to do even better, So it's a good feeling. And I have so much more now that I'm a parent. I have so much more compassion and understanding for my parents and the decisions they made, the good ones and the bad ones. Like I just have like so much more understanding. And I don't know if that it's just like an automatic thing that clicks once like you have a child, you're like, oh, I get it, but I am very grateful for both my parents. They're wonderful people, and they made me who I am.
Yeah, well, what a wonderful legacy that they have left you. For you, left you by who they are and what they did in their lives. I think you're right. It's like I always just think back of how I think about being like so clueless or naive about all of this parenting stuff and all of this adulthood stuff that you just don't seem to have a window in until you get there in many ways. Or even if people do have those windows through some hardships and through different traumas that they experience, but you still don't experience it being on the other side, in my experience, until you are on the other side. And then you see all that stuff so differently.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's another reason where I would like my son to have as much lived experience as possible. Like I don't want to dictate things to him or try to be like, do it this way. Like I want him to figure it out on his own, but I also want to like protect him. I remember growing up too, like my mom put me in all these different programs. Like I was in Girl Scouts, and I did I did so many different things. Like I did dance class, I did like ballet, I did all these things. And there was this one time I went to summer camp, and like I came back from camp and I was so excited. My mom would like sometimes chaperone some of these things. And she chaperoned this one time. We went on this like hike, right? But in my mind, the hike was like a mountain. Like you would have thought I was like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. Like I was just so adamant. And I was telling the story like much later. I was like older, telling the story. And my mom kind of chimed in, and she was like, honey, like you really went up a hill. Like it wasn't that. It wasn't. And she was like, and we were behind you. Like I thought like I went up this hill by myself with my friends. And my mom was like, we were like 2 feet behind you the whole time. And it's like something about her telling that story. It's like, oh, like even if you give like a little bit of fake independence, like make your kids like feel like they're doing it on their own. That actually is like really nourishing too, because I told this story like years later, like, do you remember that time like we climbed this like huge mountain? And my mom's like, no, that actually wasn't it, but it made me feel that way. And yeah, you felt it. And like, even that feeling, that confidence, like it does something for you. So I want to give my son all the little mountains he can climb, but I want to be like, just sitting in a bush, making sure he's okay. Yeah. But I want him to climb. I want him to find his own way and climb up, and he's going to fall, but I'll be there.
I love that image. I love that image for everyone to think about. Like, your child thinks they're climbing a mountain on their own, and it might just be a little hill with you behind the bushes, but you think about the amount of self-confidence that one gets with that experience.
It's so true, you know? Like, I'm definitely not going to be like a helicopter parent. I'm just like, no, go fly on your own. I'll be over here.
So your latest anthology, so you talk about being raised, in addition by your parents and your extended kin, by Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou. And your latest anthology, of course, on girlhood, you say, I'm seeking to illuminate the narrow space between Black girlhood and Black womanhood. That seems like a dance. Tell us about what is that sliver?
I like that image, because it's like you're on a tightrope, right? Like it's just like, I felt like a lot of times when I was a young person developing, trying to figure out my agency in the world, I was sometimes I was perceived as being older or more adult, having more responsibilities. I can't name the number of times. I have 2 younger brothers. I am the oldest, and I would be taking them to school, and the assumption would be I was like their mom, and I'd be like, what in the world? Like, how? Like, I am their older sister dropping them off at daycare. You know what I mean? But so when I wrote this anthology on girlhood, I really wanted to look at the perspective and the nuance of young Black girls through the narrative of short story. I really love short stories because it's, often short stories aren't heavy on plot. It's really about the voice of the character and understanding their inner dialogue. So I wanted folks to get the perspective of who Black girls are, how complicated they can be, and funny and carefree, and also just trying to determine who they are in the world and how they can like show up for themselves. And so we have stories about, not only do we have like young girls, but we also have sisters, and we have best friends, and we have like young romance. Like, one of my favorite stories is Melvin in the 6th grade, who talks about this like young girl who has this crush on a boy, and how she's like figuring it out, but she's also like trying to be cool and impress her friends. And then we have this beautiful story about a young girl that is trying to figure out religion. It's actually a story written by Rita Dove, who's one of my favorite poets. But Rita Dove, if you don't know, has done a little bit of everything. Like, of course, amazing poet laureate, but she writes short stories and operas, and like, she's just so phenomenal. So I found a story that she wrote. I was like, I know, we have to include this. Like, how many people know that like Rita Dove writes short stories? So and then, of course, there's Alice Walker, and the one and only story written by Toni Morrison is included in the collection. So I just had all these like beautiful stories that I was falling in love with. And quite honestly, when I was doing the research for it, like, I wanted this book to be like 100 stories. Like, I had the longest list. I had the longest list of stories, like from CZ Packer and Ann Petrie. I just had all these stories that I was gathering together because I was trying to write this like love letter to my younger self, but then I had to narrow it down, and I got down to 15. And I think I did a good job of trying to like find voices from across regions, and, writers from the Caribbean, and writers from the South, and just like finding the nuance of just young Black girls trying to become themselves. And with well-read Black girls, sometimes the focus is so much on our racial identity that I wanted it to include both, like just like the youthfulness and the lightness, and how tender and vulnerable you are when you're a young person, and you want to find places that validate you and make you feel like whole, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so each story I read did that for me. And yeah, it became like this like really love project as I was putting it together. And I was just like, oh, I hope this introduces readers to, all the literary foremothers that have
Mm-hmm.
inspired me, but
Mm-hmm.
also these new beautiful contemporary voices that are coming up. So one of my favorite authors is Camille Acker, and she's part of like the Well-Read Black Girl family. She was part of the book club. I actually, before she was published, I was one of the reviewers that read her story for the Lewis. It's a prize, it's a literary prize through Feminist Press. Like her first book is
Mm-hmm.
published through Feminist Press. And I was like one of the readers for that. So I saw her work like really early on. And I like, that is like such my sweet spot. I live for debut writers, people that are just like coming out, and I want to like support their first book, and then I want to support their 20th book, like whatever their career looks like. So I made sure to have her short story in here. And she writes about DC, which I'm a native of DC, so it's a lot of her
Mm-hmm.
stories about the East Coast that made me reminded me of childhood. Her story was really sassy because it talks about these like young, rambunctious girls on the train, and they're kind of being like a little rude, a little,
Mm-hmm.
unexpected. And I remember being that like sassy girl on the train, like trying to like maybe talking a little bit louder than I should have, or calling attention to myself. And her story kind of sits in that space. And I always tell people, if you see some like loud kids, like quote unquote misbehaving on the train, like they're just, getting into it, especially in the city. You have to remember most city kids don't ride a school bus. So
Right.
it's like their
Yeah.
school bus.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, when I see that, I'm like, all these kids should be in theater because they're just like
They're
acting,
acting out. Yep.
Yeah, they're
Yep.
acting. They're just
Yeah.
like they're like unchaperoned, they're free, they're testing the waters, they're seeing what words and I used to push buttons and say all kinds of things like, like spew political blah blah blah, and just say things just to say it, to see if I could get a reaction. I'm just like, this is what like being a young person is really about, like to push boundaries. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't like tisk when I see kids acting out. I'm like, yeah, like go ahead. That's what you're supposed to do when you're 13, 14. Like, why not?
Absolutely. And how do
So
we forget? Like the older we get, everyone, this is a good message for all of us. The older we get, we're like, oh my God, why would anyone do that? And we're just like,
yeah.
we used to do that, right? Like, let's have a
Yes,
little
you used to.
patience. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like a different environment. For city kids, it might be like a public subway. For other folks, it might be, like on their bikes somewhere, like in like the woods, like, or just like hanging out, or it's like on a farm. Like it's just a different
Yeah.
environment, but it's like kids are all doing the same things. They're just like pushing boundaries. So that story, the story that she wrote in this collection kind of sits in that space. So but that's what I was looking for, just like all different types of perspectives. And
Well, and you say your goal is to shine a light on all of this
yes,
abundance of talent, right? And
yes,
that's what you're doing. That's what you're
yes.
doing.
Thank you so much. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. It's such a labor of love. And, unlike a novel, anthologies kind of sit in a different space, and they require you to, my hope is like you'll read one author in this anthology and you'll want to read more of their work. So I
Mm-hmm.
always include reading lists and include questions and find spaces for the conversation to go beyond the book. So we'll
Yeah.
continue talking and having moments of connection.
Awesome. So, okay, before we get to that final question, which is lurking, we have to give some shine some light on your podcast. So here you are, and now you're on a platform, Pushkin.
Yes.
Malcolm Gladwell, one of my like all-time favorite writers and thinkers, and
Oh, he's amazing.
you're
He's
spreading
so
the
amazing.
word. So tell us about the podcast and what you're trying. What do you want to do with it?
The podcast for me is like the best of all the world. It's the book club, it's the books, it's the festival where we're sitting, talking to the author, having a one-on-one conversation, and really talking to them about their creative journey and how they became writers and how they really became the people they are. Like I am very curious about people's just full backgrounds. For some people, you write a book in a month or two, and then you talk to other authors and they're like, it took me 10 years to write this masterpiece. And I want to dispel just like the energy or like what it means to be a writer. I just think we have so many different paths to becoming the people that we are. And I want to just like show that journey. I want people to understand just like the patience that you have with yourself, and also the level of self-discipline that is required for artistry. Like it takes time to kind of like create any piece of work. I understand that wholeheartedly as a writer myself, as an editor, as someone who just like enjoys like the beauty of like art around me. It takes time. So things can feel really quick on social media and feel like overnight. And I'm like, on this podcast, we're going to get to the time it takes to make the work, to write the books. And so it's been really wonderful to talk to all of my heroes. I had the opportunity to interview Anita Hill and Tarana Burke, Jacqueline Woodson, these powerhouse writers that just do so much for our culture and for the literary canon. They are like single-handedly changing how we experience words and literature. So it's been just I can't even express how wonderful it is to be in the space and talk to them. And a lot of times, the interview comes down to like 30, 40 minutes, but I could talk to them all day. We can talk like hours at the time,
I'm having the same challenge right now talking to you, Glory. I'm like looking at it. I'm like, oh my God, I have all these questions. And so first, congratulations. I mean, what a platform, and what an honor and a privilege to have those conversations. So it's just wonderful. Like things just,
thank you.
One thing just keeps happening from the other. So that's wonderful.
Isn't that life though? It's just like, you never know. It's so amazing.
All right. I did say I had like the last question coming, but I have one more before that, because I have to ask this, because this is so critical to what we're about on this show. So you're about, you're just about uplifting voices, uplifting lives, again, shining a light on the talent and that abundance that exists out there. And, that's what we want to do on this show, and in terms of doing that for creating more compassion, more love, one individual at a time. So knowing we share that, please tell us, how do you feel that we can take action, like one person at a time, to help uplift Black voices?
I think the best thing you can do is listen. So when someone is telling you a story, sharing their lived experience, really actively listen and invest in them, and make sure you're making eye contact and you're being present with the person. I can't tell you how many times in the past where I'm feeling like you're not connecting with me. You're trying to like regurgitate or tell me your side. And it's like, no, like let's fully listen to my experience and really understand it, and not to problem solve, not to like, offer your own opinion, but just like sit there and listen and understand. And I think if we took more time to listen to each other, listen to each other's stories, obviously buy each other's books. Like I read widely. Of course, my platform is centered on the works of Black women, but I have read all the things, from Shakespeare to Walt Whitman, like I've read all the things, and I have a wonderful understanding of how we are connected universally. And I think that we need that perspective for BIPOC voices as well.
Yeah.
You can enjoy the work of all these incredible writers who serve your attention and your love, and you listen to their voices and reading their stories widely. And when you do read a beautiful story that you're taken by, share it. Share those, like spread the wealth, share it with other people, talk about it, give it good reviews, all those things matter in our ecosystem and they make a difference. So I think that's like the primary thing that will make society and like one
Yeah.
person at a time is a little bit better if we just paid a little bit more attention and listened to each other like deeply with respect.
Nice. Yes. Listen with respect and support and promote everyone that you like hearing about and reading about and sharing, spreading the message.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, how many? I mean, we
Yeah.
have all these wonderful outlets now. We have
Yeah.
social media and podcasts and all these incredible things. But I am not kidding you. I still like when a friend tells me something, that's like the best, best
Right.
stamp of approval.
Yeah,
I will
exactly.
go out and buy the thing, download it, listen. If I have someone that I trust, the trusted voice, I'm
Yep.
like, all right, this is a friend. This is someone in my community that I want to uplift. Let's do it.
Let's
You
do
can
it.
do the same thing.
Okay, here we go. Parent footprint moment question. Tell us about a time that you became aware of yourself as an individual, maybe as a parent, or even an awareness of your own parents, and that new awareness had a positive impact on your life, your child's life, and or those you love.
I think that, I mentioned it earlier, when my father passed away, that was such
Mm-hmm.
a life-changing moment. And it brought my mother and I together in this whole other way. And I also started to recognize how fragile she was and
Mm-hmm.
how just like how human she was, you know? Like I think before my dad passed away, I just saw my mom and my dad as my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And, there were certain expectations I had of them as parents. And I didn't really take into consideration their past and who they were before they had me as their child. And at my dad's funeral, there were so many stories about who he was as a young person and how my parents met. Like they had told me the story kind of, over the years, but hearing it just like shared by so many people that we loved,
Mm.
it just gave me like a new appreciation about just like honoring their past and the people that we are before we have children and how that all of that influences your life and how you take care of yourself, how you like take care of your kids, just like I had a new level of compassion and love for my mom and my parents
Mm.
after losing my dad and then even going through there was this beautiful moment where my mother and I were just like going through these old photographs of them as young people like in college and at that time like my dad used to smoke Marlboros,
Yep.
no we're not encouraging
Yep.
smoking but like
Yeah.
there are like all these pictures of my parents and my mom was smoking and I was just like, what, you smoked with dad? Like I knew my dad smoked but I was just like, oh my God, like really, like my mom is so pristine and just like not
Yeah.
a smoker, like never, but and I saw this picture of her and just like I just had this it was so eye-opening and just like I just saw them in this new light. And I think maybe I'm not the only one. I'm sure there's like as adults, like you suddenly
Yeah.
there's this turning moment when you see your parents as just people,
Oh, for sure.
and like you really embrace their flaws and their
Mm-hmm.
imperfections and the beauty of who they've become.
Yeah.
But it just was so beautiful to kind of like reminisce and think about um them as young people. And it just made and now that I have my own child, like I still feel like really young and
Right.
energetic. And
Yeah.
I'm sure there'll be a time where my son looks at me and he's like,
Yeah.
Mom, like, come
Yeah.
on,
Not for a
you
while.
elder.
Enjoy it. Not for a while, but yeah, it'll come. Yeah.
It'll come exactly.
Yeah.
He's gonna have this moment where he's like my
Yeah.
older, unexperienced,
Yeah.
unknowing mother, and he'll
Yeah.
just like roll his eyes at me because I did that for years at both my
Yeah.
parents. Like, what do you know? Like, what? Like, come on. But in truth, they know a lot.
They
They
do.
know so much, and just having a better appreciation
Yeah.
and that grace thing always comes up, like showing them
Mm-hmm.
grace and
Yeah.
gratitude for who they are and all the decisions they made for
Yeah.
our family. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's a beautiful transition. It's a story of transition because that is generally what happens is, first of all, we think our parents are amazing, superhuman people. And then at some point, usually around pre-adolescence, adolescence, we can go the other way and be like, oh my God, what's wrong with them? They don't do anything right. And then I think as we get older and maybe cross over, it's seeing them as human beings with their strengths, with their challenges, with like all of the humanness, right? And appreciating them for all of it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And just being a
Yeah.
little bit more gentle,
Yeah.
I think that like that's so important, that gentleness of just like, wow, like you have lived, like life is long, like you've done
Yeah.
so much and
Yeah.
you did so much before me.
Yeah.
And recognizing that.
Well, Glory, congratulations on everything that is going
Thank
on.
you.
It's so exciting. I'm excited to continue, now that we're connected, to follow you and watch you just continue to just do your thing, which
Oh
it
my gosh,
seems so
thank
naturally.
you.
So tell everyone, all those, where to find you.
Oh my goodness. So I am on all of the social media. It's on Instagram. It's at Well-Read Black Girl. And I have my website, wellreadblackgirl.com. All the things are there. If you're interested in joining the book club, please sign up for our newsletter. Of course, we want you to download the podcast. Please download the podcast and subscribe and listen. That's it. Like we're all over the internet and we always take book recommendations. So let us know what you're reading.
Pleasure to be talking with you today. Thank you so much for sharing yourself with us.
Oh, thank you. This was absolutely wonderful. And however I can support you in the future, please let me know. This was like a wonderful, wonderful interview.
All right, everyone. Just as Glory says, we all love your reviews. We love your subscribing. We love you bringing amazing people like yourselves to our communities. So please continue to do that. We are grateful. Do your best to be that person you want your child to become. And ask yourself the guiding question I ask myself each day: what footprint do you want to leave? This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Strummer Man, composed and performed by Pro Tunes. Artwork is by Garrett Ross. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Parent Footprint Podcast and on Twitter at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, go to exactlyrightmedia.com.